Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Argus Fertilizer Matters podcast. I am your host today. My name is Beatrice O'Kelly, and I work in product development for the expansion markets here at Argus. These include the fertilizer sector. My background is editorial. I covered sulfur markets for 2 years, and our most recent product launch is the Sustainable and Specialty Fertilizers report, and these markets are going to be the focus of today's podcast. Sustainable and specialty fertilizers are a niche but growing sector, as these fertilizers are going to be crucial for fertilizer companies to reach their sustainability goals. I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Nash, Senior Fertilizer Editor here at Argus. Mike has many years' experience covering traditional and specialty fertilizers and is responsible for producing our new service. I'm also joined by Ollie Hatfield, Vice President in Business Development for the fertilizer team. For those who don't know Ollie, he joined Argus in October 2018 following our acquisition of Integer Research, where he was a founder and spent 15 years as head of the fertilizer market research team. So Mike and Ollie, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, B. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, B. Great to be here.
So Mike, tell us a bit more about this new service.
Well, there's a few key drivers to why we're doing this. Firstly, Argus has already been looking more and more at the water-soluble fertilizer market in particular. You may remember we published a monthly report which goes back to late 2020, as well as an annual strategy report which delves into the market's mid to long-term outlook. That was produced by our consulting team. And it's a large market. It's a 4 million tonne a year global market. Many fertilizer producers have moved into that space, and its raw materials are becoming more commoditized. And that means prices are becoming more transparent. And it's clear that the market needed it and was already starting to use that monthly report in contract talks. So it made perfect sense to us to expand the number of assessed prices and to publish those weekly. And that's really the bread and butter to the Argus editorial reporting team. Secondly, because it's a growing market, commoditized fertilizer demand, the traditional commoditized fertilizers, those markets are slowing. In fact, it's pretty stagnant. But water solubles, for example, is estimated to be growing at an average of around 3% a year over the last decade or so, albeit with the spikes up and down that we see across most fertilizer markets. So we see a lot of potential here for more precise assessments and more trade going forward. But I think, Ollie, there are a couple of other key market drivers underlying this growth that you might want to explore further.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. So there are two ways to look at this, really, both in the production and the application of fertilizers. Firstly, there's been a drive to reduce the carbon footprint of fertilizer production. Of course, that mainly relates to nitrogen, where the carbon is generated through the production of ammonia, which starts with a hydrocarbon raw material. And that's led to the development of zero and low carbon ammonia-based fertilizers. There's more interest to use and to commercialise byproducts and waste products, which are plant nutrients, and hence there's a growing demand and use and creation of supply for organic fertilisers and organo-minerals. And secondly, when we think about application of fertilisers, it makes more sense to apply fertiliser more efficiently and to cut waste and losses, and there's a great deal of pressure on that side of the fertiliser value chain. And this has led to the development of fertilisers containing secondary and micronutrients, water solubles, which you've mentioned already, and complementary products like biostimulants. And then there's also a push to reduce emissions from nitrogen applications by reducing application losses, and hence the growth in demand for enhanced efficiency fertilisers. And we've seen a lot of regulation, which is effectively driving these markets in many locations, many important fertiliser markets. Europe, where we are, is very much leading the way here. There's lots of rules and regulations in place, but also coming quickly if we think about the European Union, which are pushing the market along, and also in individual countries. And I can give you a few examples of those. In Ireland, they have a programme called the Ag Climatise, which has a roadmap prohibiting the use of urea. It's promoting the use of urease inhibitor products and kind of enabling a switch to calcium ammonium nitrate. That's, the goal there is to improve the efficiency use of nitrogen and reduce climate change related emissions from nitrogen applications. Similarly, in the UK here, DEFRA is in a process at the moment of consultation, but they're looking hard at ways to cut ammonia emissions. And perhaps further ahead, in Germany, they have already introduced legislation back in 2020, which has mandated the use of urea inhibitors. So in Germany, since that time, you've not been able to apply urea without some form of inhibitor treatment.
And of course, being a price reporting agency, the key challenge for us is providing transparent and reliable prices for these products. So in the case of water solubles, we now have traditional weekly market assessments covering NOP, technical map, 1261 map, and water soluble SOP. That's in their new report. But for some of these other products where trade volumes are low or markets are in their infancy, suppliers are also pretty understandably reluctant to share information on products that are very different. And there it's harder to assess prices. So we've come up with some more creative approaches to offer a market value.
And I suppose that's where this new report comes in.
Yes, that's right. So we've launched a new global market reporting service providing weekly assessments for water solubles. And we have calculated prices for low carbon fertilizers. For secondary and micronutrients, we've got some markers that are calculations which help in that segment. Organics and organo-minerals, we have a tool which we'll talk about in a minute, which is very helpful for that segment. And enhanced efficiency fertilizers we have plans for. At the moment, the numbers, the data that we produce for that segment is quite infant, but we plan to grow that as well. I can give a couple of examples on zero and low carbon fertilizers, the calculations that we've used for those, and also for secondary and micronutrients. So for low carbon fertilizers, this is a part of the market which is very much in its infancy. There are a few prototype level production plants, mainly in Europe, which are producing small volumes. But we can see that there's a huge amount of interest in the development of that market, and we expect that to grow pretty quickly. While there's a gap effectively in understanding what the value of these products are, because the market so far is very small, what we've done is to create some values using calculations, which we think will help participants in that market or interested parties in that market to understand the prices at which those products will trade in the future. So there's really two broad approaches. One is to understand the values of finished fertilizers, which have a carbon footprint. As we said earlier, they're mainly nitrogen products like CAN, ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, and so on. And what we do is to understand what those products will cost using the lower carbon raw material. So that's using the old school ways of describing ammonia, blue and green, but low carbon intensity ammonia. We run the calculations of what it costs to produce that low carbon ammonia through models for the downstream part of the fertilizer production process. And then it enables us to produce values for low carbon finished fertilizers. So we're running some markers in the new service which use that basis for calculation. And then secondly, what we do in Europe is ahead of the game, if you like, in terms of providing carbon taxes as a means of encouraging lower carbon markets for things like fertilizers. And what we can do is help the market to understand once something like ETS, which is the mechanism by which they price carbon in Europe, once the effect of ETS is rolled out through the implementation of CBAM, which will influence and impact imported product into Europe, we can use calculations of what the carbon intensity of the product which is produced in Europe or imported into Europe, and using that carbon intensity, multiply it by the ETS price of the day, and then we get some idea of what the price of those products will be once ETS has a full impact. So that's what we have for low carbon fertilizers. We also have some markers for secondary and micronutrients. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's relatively embryonic, but we can start by using products like ammonium sulfate, TSP, SSP, and use the existing market prices, which we publish for those in our suite of commodity fertilizer market services, and use those numbers effectively to deconstruct and identify the values of the nutrient components. So using the example of ammonium sulfate, which contains sulfate and nitrogen, we can isolate the value of the sulfate by deducting off the value of its nitrogen, which we use on a kind of parity basis with the urea market price, and we can track the sulfate value on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, Ollie, for that. Sounds like very interesting ways in order to form price points in these more niche markets. But you mentioned a tool earlier for pricing organics. Can you tell me more about this and where people can find it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we're really excited about. It's called the Argus Nutrient Calculator. It's actually something that we've developed really benefiting from colleagues that we have in the metals team who created a tool for alloys. And we saw direct parallels with the complexities of pricing alloys in the metal industry with what we see is the development of more complex fertilizer products in the fertilizer sector. So we developed this tool which enables buyers, sellers, producers of these complex products, like organics, organo-minerals in particular, where the sources of the products are really diverse, the grades are very different. And what the tool allows users to do is to better understand the baseline values for those products by linking the nutrient values which are contained in those unique organics or organo-minerals to the market prices of the commodities which contain those nutrients. So I'll give you an example. If there was a producer who was selling an organic product that was a grade of 333, in other words, it contains 3 units of nitrogen, 3 units of phosphate, 3 units of potash, we'd look to the price of urea and the price of phosphate and potash from the commodity products which contain those, if you like, the benchmarks for those products like urea, like DAP and like MOP in each case, and we just adjust them according to the lower nutrient in the 333 that I just described, and it gives those organic fertilizer players some basis with which to identify the value for those component parts, and then also importantly to track them over time and to have a much easier way with which to trade those products, because those are agreed values, agreed intrinsic values for that product. And not only can we link to the commodity equivalents, but we can also adjust those prices according to the unique characteristics of whichever organic product that they're producing. So, certain organics are actually certified. No doubt that comes with a significant premium, and the calculator can incorporate that premium into the formula. By contrast, you might also find some products, some organic waste products, which have some value, but they might be, for example, unformed. They might be in liquid form, for example, which generally means they're going to need to trade at a discount compared to some other product which has been pelletized. It's much easier to transport and store. So the calculator tool, we think, is a very useful and powerful tool to enable participants in this market to better understand the value of their products, and hopefully that will enable them to trade much more easily. So when we were thinking about this product and this tool, we spoke to a whole bunch of people in the market who are actually involved in this area. And bear in mind that we do lots of consulting work in this area, helping producers of organics and organo-minerals to market their product and understand its values. But what we found was that many companies are actually just using spreadsheets to do the same exercise. So we hope that what will happen is that they will find using our tool much more easy than what they're already doing.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Ollie, and thanks to Mike. And I think that brings us to the end of this Argus Fertilizer Matters podcast. My sincere thanks to Mike Nash, Senior Fertilizer Editor, and Ollie Hatfield, VP of Business Development.
Thanks, B.
Thanks, B.
And as always, thanks for listening. If you want to know more about the Argus Sustainable and Specialty Fertilizer service, please use the related links on the podcast page or search Argus Sustainable Fertilizers in your web browser. If you're an Argus subscriber, don't forget to check out our weekly webinar roundup of global fertilizer markets, which will be out early next week and available via Argus Direct. Finally, don't forget to look out for our next episode of Fertilizer Matters, which will be out soon. Until then, I'm Beatrice O'Kelly for Argus Media, and bye for now.